Well, hello guys, and welcome back to the second part in this three-part series about wrapping my Fiesta. Where we left things last time, I was just cleaning up the front end of the car, ready to get started with this lovely air release wrap. Before we go any further, I'd like to talk about the inspiration behind the colour scheme that I've chosen. Colin McRae drove a Ford Focus WRC from 1999 onwards and was an absolute legend, had all sorts of crashes and survival moments, and famously in the Cyprus Rally 2002 he managed to roll the car twice and managed to keep going, supported by a team of mechanics around him and a huge influence on me in the very start of my interest in motorsport.
But this is Colin McRae we're talking about here, a man who doesn't know anything but flat out.
There's no way we're going to make the corner.
Another roll for McRae, but amazingly, that Ford Focus is still able to continue.
And those iconic moments following the crash, with him kicking in the back quarter to get the car going again on the rally. Some legendary stuff. And who could forget Colin McRae Rally 2? The free demo included use of the Ford Focus WRC here, and I played on this a lot as a kid. So these are very big nostalgic things for me. So I thought I'd look into what I could get sorted out for the Fiesta. I had a look on the Creative Vinyl website. Now these guys are pretty good. I recommend getting in touch with them if you have any queries or you want to do this kind of project yourself. But very fortunately, they offered a Ford Focus 2001 livery, which is exactly what I was wanting. You know, the Telefonica, Movistar, the Martini, the Valvoline sponsorship, you name it, it looks fantastic. So I went ahead and placed an order. So while all of that was going on, I stripped off any remaining trim for the car and I managed to break the rear diffuser. So I had to go away and get that fixed before I could proceed any further with the build. So I've managed to give the diffuser a nice lick of paint. It's now looking pretty good. Re-glued on, or I should say re-JB welded the fins back on, so they're in good nick. I'm now ready to fit that onto the back of the car. That's probably the last bit of mechanical work I'm going to have to do today. So obviously vinyl wrapping doesn't quite count as mechanical work. So I went into it with a huge amount of confidence. I got a big piece of vinyl and ended up folding it back over on itself and not being able to get myself out of a pickle. Even with a hairdryer, I kept making the same mistakes again and again and again until eventually it ended up in the bin and I had to scrap off a panel. And at which point I decided it's time to hit YouTube and learn how to do vinyl wrapping properly.
What does reading the wrinkles mean? A lot of beginners tend to wrestle with the material, but you'll have an easier time if you know which way to hold tension on the vinyl.
What we were doing before is we were taking the squeegee and just working them out and like totally screwing this up.
Yep, I was totally screwing it up. But on a second attempt, keeping the tension into the corners of the panel and then pushing the squeegee forward kind of at about a 30-degree angle was perfect for massaging out all the air bubbles. So having failed massively with that previous piece, I was making some pretty good progress. So when you've got those kind of concave or inset areas that you need the vinyl to sit into, it's really worth using a heat gun and also sort of sweeping across in overlapping motion across the panel to try and work the air bubble out. So here's the result after I got the panel flat. Well, obviously it's not trimmed yet. So taking a heat gun to the edge stress relieves it. You can then tuck the vinyl under and it shouldn't peel back out again. The slightly more fiddly part is running a craft knife potentially around the inside of the panel and making a nice neat trim. They recommend 3mm of overlap so you don't have it unfolding. I did my very best to follow the edge. I was quite proud of that. It's my first ever panel that I've done on the car. Looks pretty good. So confidence building, I thought it was time to have a look at the side stripes. So what's really important about this is the colour shift. And before I got started on the roof, I wanted to make sure that I had enough material to cover far enough back on the car to meet up with the Martini stripe. So here it is before I started, and voila, it is done. So actually it wasn't too bad, but it's definitely a two-man job if you were to do this in any short amount of time. It probably took me about an hour and a half to get this all smooth all the way around. But I trimmed it manually running a craft knife along. There is a bit of a risk by using a knife, so you can use knifeless tape, and we'll come on to that in a moment. So the front wing, again, this is a more complex shape, but having built the confidence with the bonnet and the roof, I gave it a go. Now these areas around the indicator are particularly tricky, so take full advantage of the heat gun, soften that vinyl, wait just a moment, and then go in with the thumb or the edge of the squeegee and work it right into the recesses. And it shouldn't come back up again. Now this air release vinyl is really clever. The adhesive itself has little channels in it that allows the air to be distributed when you apply pressure. So you end up with a much more professional result without being professional. So here we go. Important to keep that tension right up to the edge of the panel as you're working the bubbles out. But I used a piece of knifeless tape, which looks a lot like dental floss almost, underneath the surface of the vinyl. It's hidden underneath a piece of green sticky back plastic. You basically break out that filament, pull it along, and it tears the vinyl really nicely without having to use a craft knife, say in the middle of a panel where you really risk cutting through into the lacquer or making a damage. Using the heat gun into the wheel arch as well, really important to stress relieve that vinyl, the post-heating they call it, to stop the vinyl from peeling back. Just light hand pressure is enough to tuck it in, and then obviously run a craft knife around that edge where you're not going to see it. So let's take a look at that knifeless tape. So it's just like dental floss, it sits below the surface, you whiz it along, and you have a nice clean cut. There we go, so I've just made an initial cut there. You can see it then tucks in, cuts the vinyl, you can peel it back. I was really impressed with that for a first time using it. And then you grab the other end of the green sort of sticky back plastic, pull that out of the way, use a squeegee, use your thumb, tack it all back down on the edge, and job done. It actually looks really smart. I was very impressed with this stuff. So now moving on to the other arch, getting more and more confident with the process as time goes by. So making use of those air release properties. If you heat up the vinyl, you can reset a damage, you can remove some creases or some other indentations on the material and get it perfectly smooth again. You can tuck it right in. You can see me here, I'm actually chasing the air between the vinyl and the bodywork as I'm making those overlapping strokes. It's really satisfying once you get into a rhythm with this. But really important to spend time on the preparation. So I wiped everything down with isopropyl alcohol mixed with water. So it's a 70-30 mix. You put that on the surface, wipe it over with a microfiber. Make sure you haven't got any little bits of filament or other stuff on the surface. So a tack cloth or maybe a microfiber could be a good shout for just making sure there's no dust between the vinyl and the car. If you do, you end up with what looks like little stone chippy print marks on the surface and it doesn't quite adhere properly onto the panel. So it really is quite forgiving. You can rip this stuff up, re-stretch it, put it back, reset it with a heat gun quite a few times. So next up I wanted to explore the side of the door and the moulding trim panels. It would be a real pain to remove these and get them to go back on nicely. So I was doing an experiment here to see how much I could abuse that vinyl before it tears or gets damaged. So you can see me running it back and forth, really rubbing into the corner. And if you look at the top right, you can see a little hole emerging there. So that's the point where I've gone too far and I've overworked the material. Even with a heat gun, there's no coming back from that. So I decided I was going to go ahead and wrap the side of the car all in one piece, tuck it in and around, but be incredibly careful not to tear anything. And look, it all comes off. How lovely. I was getting this project completed mostly in the evenings after the kids were in bed, so somewhere between 9 and midnight most nights for a couple of weeks working on this. The next task is then laying all the side stripes and the sponsor decals out on the floor in the kitchen, taking some measurements, and then working out the best place to put a split in the panel. So roughly halfway along the stripe seems like a logical place to put the colour split because it will be hidden by the martini stripe that goes over the top. So here it is stuck on the side of the car, all very high tech, but I wanted to make sure that this kit would fit on the Fiesta. It's designed for a Focus, which is a bigger car. So then laid everything out, labelled up where the windows and doors are, and it gives me a little bit of wiggle room side to side and lay the stripe as long as I pick up on that midpoint. So really important now to be fastidious with your cleaning. I use window and glass cleaner. Something like Windolene would be absolutely fine. Get in all those creases, make sure the car is as clean as possible. See, I pulled up the rubber trim that runs along the side of the passenger window here. And I'm also now going to strip off the door handle, giving all the recess a really good clean, because I'm going to have to tuck the vinyl in on itself. It's really important to make sure you're squeaky clean on that before you get started. Now, sneaky trick I thought of was to use a board marker to trace along the outside edge of where the blue paint would be in relation to the stripe, and that gives a target to work towards for the knifeless tape, which I run from the back to the front of the car across 2 panels. So you can then yank that, it will cut the vinyl, you have a nice clean cut, and there's no risk of me dragging a Stanley knife across my lovely paint underneath. One day I might want to turn this thing back to a lovely blue Fiesta again. It is incredibly satisfying. You pull out the tape, you can see here, and then you run back along with a squeegee or a finger to just smooth the vinyl back into place, and it's so much easier and so much more accurate than what you can do with a knife freehand. I'm really impressed with this stuff, and it's not that expensive. I'll try and leave some links in the description, so if you want to get something similar for yourself, I'll point out some good brands to try. Really happy with 3M. I think pretty much all their stuff is good enough quality for the home user. One advantage to working late at night is sometimes you have amphibious visitors. This is a toad. Now moving back in, we have the last bit of the rear quarter now laid up. So here we are the following day. I've taken the car out of the garage, turned it round and reversed it in so I can work on the other side away from the wall in the garage. Got a bit more space. So the next job I think is going to be the A-pillars at the front of the car and getting those to look nice. So starting out with one piece of vinyl from front to back, and what we're going to try to do is to twist and turn that along the A-pillar rather than using a very big piece and then trimming it down. It's a little bit more economical. But the challenge is then, how do you tuck that in between the windscreen and the A-pillar itself? Top tip, if you take a piece of the backing paper, fold it over on itself, it's kind of waxed and not very sticky. So if you can get it between the windscreen and the A-pillar, then use a trim tool and move the 2 pieces along at the same time. You can actually tuck that vinyl in really neatly without tearing it or causing any problems at all. I'm holding the phone with my chin here, so apologies for the quality of the videoing. I had to have both hands to make that work. But you can see now the front A-pillars tucked in really nicely. That vinyl is looking sharp. Really happy with how it's coming out. Unfortunately, in the stripping down process, I broke something else, so I bought some fancy new indicators for the princely sum of $6.99 off eBay, and they've got flashy LEDs on. I couldn't be happier. So getting a bit carried away, why not throw on a decal while I've got the wing mirrors back on the car after doing the white wrap? I've gone for a WRC logo. I got a bit excited, so time for a panning shot. A little taste of what's to come later. Now moving on to the back of the car, having to strip the boot handle and lots of the trim out of the way, including the boot lock, to be able to install the vinyl at the back. So there's a big old plastic trim piece you have to take off and then access the boot lock mechanism, which you then prise the cable away from. You take out the lock barrel with a simple 90-degree anti-clockwise twist and it all comes away after you remove the 3 bolts. And you've got nice access then to be able to wrap the back of the car. So much like I did on the sides, I'm aware of where the martini stripes need to go, so I've mocked them up in paper by tracing over the original decals. And again, I'm going to get myself a bald pen, run along the outside edge of where the blue is, and that gives me a target to aim for the knifeless tape. As long as I'm on the other side of that line, it'll all be hidden by the decal once the blue stripes go on. Overlaying that vinyl and now using the knifeless tape, let's zoom in on that dental floss action. It really is amazing stuff, just how it cuts through the vinyl. Very predictable, very easy to use. And let's tear off those pieces. So the next bit is then eyeballing the rear bumper, trying to get that all to line up so the white starts and finishes roughly where it does on the boot itself. And the last piece of white wrapping to be done now on the front of the car. Similar job, knifeless tape following down from the corner of where the headlights are, down to the edge of the number plates around. And there we go, job done. So if you've enjoyed the journey of riding along with me wrapping the Fiesta, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hang around for part 3 where we stick on all the logos and manufacturer decals. Thanks very much for watching. For now, engineer out.